Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. And did Elon fall for the Israeli honey trap? Is he compromised? Remember, I told y'all, all of this looking around the finances, they control the finances. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into it.
Yo, was Elon Musk honeypotted by Israel with this whole Ashley Sinclair situation? I know it might sound crazy, but follow me here. Now, Ashley, who's a conservative influencer, shocked the world when she announced that she has had Elon Musk's baby. And allegedly, this baby is 5 months old, more or less. Now, Elon Musk having a kid out of wedlock isn't really all that surprising. The man got 13 kids, got like 15 baby mamas. This isn't actually all that weird for him. I mean, he's basically the Dwight Howard of the tech industry. But it is weird for him to be parading his child around recently in the White House, in meetings with international leaders, and then pretending like his 5-month-old child doesn't exist. Now, as he claimed that Elon said he wanted to keep the baby a secret out of protection. He wanted to protect everybody involved. But once again, how does that make sense after you've been parading one of your children around all over the media recently? But more than that, let's talk about the weird timing of this 5-month-old baby. Interestingly enough, the age of this child would mean that he was conceived within a couple of months after October 7th. And Ashley herself is actually represented by a PR strategist that has connections and has been paid by an Israeli security company. Now, in a vacuum, that might not seem so strange, but it also happens to line up with when Elon took that meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, when he visited Israel, when he did that little conference with Benjamin Shapiro, and basically threw all of his free speech principles out the window to censor whoever on behalf of Zionists. And throughout this last year, little did we know, he had political ambitions. And this particular PR agent happens to have represented several of Trump's allies in the past. Now, even though this baby was born 5 months ago, somehow, just recently, just this last weekend, the tabloid somehow managed to get a hold of the truth and decided to release it after the results of the campaign. Now, I wonder what would have happened if this information came out while Trump was running for office, while Elon was campaigning.
He pretended like he want to look around the finances and see where the money's at, who's been stealing what from the U.S. government. Then the Israelis put out this information. Oh, yeah, well, you have been honey trapped by one of our spies, Elon.
On behalf of Trump.
Play nice, man.
And how that conservative base would have received the news that yet another baby was being born out of wedlock by Elon Musk while he was in an active relationship with the actual director of Neuralink, which is a whole different conversation. Would it have killed the Trump campaign? Probably not. But would it have severely hurt Elon's chances of being part of the campaign and eventually being part of the administration and having the control over the administration, at least seemingly, that he has at this moment? I think an argument can be made that Trump would have to back away from him a little bit if negative news came out about him in the middle of what they thought was going to be a close campaign. And also, let's be clear about something. Israel's not above blackmailing political figures, businessmen, whoever they need to, at whatever point they need to get the outcome that they want. And if you're going to be in charge of the most popular social media company in the world, did you think that you were going to be excluded from that list of blackmailees? This is the same Israel who Epstein was working on behalf of. This is the same Israel who Ghislaine Maxwell and her father were working on behalf of. This is the same Israel who, with a phone call, could get you hired or fired in a moment's notice. So I would absolutely not rule out the possibility that Elon Musk was honeypotted. And that's why he wanted to keep this quiet. But who knows, maybe Elon Musk is the exclusion to the rule and he's the only politician in damn near all of Washington to not be blackmailed and controlled by Israel. Maybe he's an exclusion to the rule. Right.
If you don't know what honeypot means, go Google it, do some research, and then get back to me. Because I can assure you there's nothing cute about it. But as of right now, we don't know for sure yet. But it's starting to look like Ashley St. Clair is some sort of maybe possible Mossad agent or asset.
Absolutely.
That was purposely placed here to compromise prominent figures on the right and to implicate them in certain controversies.
Now, put all that into context that Elon Musk is looking into the U.S. financial system. Remember I told you yesterday, everybody in the world knows who control our financial system. It's the small hats. Now the small hats letting Elon know, we got you, sucker. We got you. Now you better blame everybody but us. You better not never say it's us who've been stealing.
Or what have you. And in this situation, it looks like there's a possibility that the powers that be, that the people against Elon may use this new child as leverage against him. Now, when I look at the reactions to a lot of this news online, it's extremely disappointing. In fact, it's very depressing. It's almost as if Trump won the election and everyone forgot about everything that happened leading up to that. It's almost like, everyone wants to pretend that they know about this or that, but it seems to me like no one was paying attention to what was going on with Epstein, because if you were, you knew that he was using these assets, he was using young women to implicate powerful people all over the world and blackmail them so he could have power over them. And all I see online right now is, well, what does this have to do with those? What does Elon having a baby by this girl got to do with Elon? What about it personal life? How is this going to affect Doge? This doesn't affect anything. And I'm looking at these people like, are you serious right now? Are you freaking serious? People, for some reason, they cannot possibly fathom how this could possibly affect Elon Musk or anything that he has going on with Doge or anything that he's doing with Donald Trump. And I'm just sitting here flabbergasted. I am so surprised that people,
Absolutely.
I don't want to call them dumb, but it's like, I don't know, maybe everyone let their guards down and they forgot how the world works around us. Have you forgot that they've been using women like Ashley St. Clair to implicate powerful men for years and take them down? Have you forgot about the tactics that these people use? We all know about it. I thought we were all on the same page when we were exposing a lot of this stuff, but apparently not, because apparently people didn't learn anything. Because if you're someone sitting at home watching this video right now, and you can't even formulate a thought to possibly think how this could affect Elon Musk and how this could affect everything he has going on, then it's like, I don't know what to tell you anymore. Because it's kind of obvious. It's right there in front of your face. Can you not use past examples to kind of understand how this can and is already being used against Elon? It's not about, oh, well, this is his personal life. It doesn't matter if it's his personal life. Do you think that details about people's personal life isn't used against them? Do you not pay attention to politics at all? It's almost as if everyone forgot how all of this works. So, yeah, someone like Ashley St. Clair weaseling her way into having a baby with the most powerful person on earth, a baby that can and is and will be used against him to possibly force Elon Musk to do this or not do that. The fact that that blows over people's head is mind-boggling to me. But let's get back on track here. Because right now, there's a conversation about Ashley St. Clair. A lot of people are wondering, who is this chick, right? Half the people, most of you all watching this video never heard of this woman a day in your life. And you can do all the research you want. You want. You can do all the research in the world. No one can give you a real straight answer as to why Ashley St. Clair is even known or even semi-famous in the first place. No one really truly knows how she kind of got here, how she rose to fame. It's like one day no one knew Ashley St. Clair existed, and then the next day, all of a sudden, she was propped up on all of these big right-wing podcasts. All of a sudden, she's at every event in Mar-a-Lago. Who the hell is this woman? No one knows, but she's there. She snaked and slithered her way right in there, just like a secret little Mossad agent would. So no one can give you a straight answer as to how she became a prominent figure. It's not like she has very interesting takes or opinions or anything like that. She kind of just came literally out of nowhere. She went from no one knowing her to her being a prominent influencer with like 1 million followers like overnight. No one even knows how it happened.
Mossad.
Do people not find that odd? Do people not find it odd when these people, there's no natural social media growth. There's no natural growth of an audience. They just appear on your timelines one day, and suddenly everyone acts like they know them. That's what happened with Ashley St. Clair. But you see, people have been pointing this out well before she got pregnant by Elon. In fact, well before anyone knew about the Elon baby, well before she even, I guess, hooked up with Elon or met Elon, people were already exposing this chick. People were already calling her a Mossad agent. People were already exposing her as a fake plant. And this has been going on for years, it turns out. And a lot of people were turning a blind eye because, you know, a lot of people are simping over Ashley. She's kind of cute, so no one wants to hear the criticism. But Ashley herself all the time acknowledges how people call her out for being Mossad. And I mean, she acknowledges this kind of halfway jokingly. But if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, pretty often it's a duck. But I'll just show you a few examples. I find out at least once a week that I'm Mossad. Who pays you? Mostly Mossad. The left calls me a Yahtzee and the right calls me Mossad. Here she says, the amount of times I get called Mossad or controlled opposition for being Jewish by this cohort is incredible. So Ashley is herself acknowledging that throughout the years, people keep pointing out or claiming that she's Mossad. Now, obviously, she kind of leans into it a little bit, but it's kind of weird now. Now that we see everything that transpired with Elon Musk, is this her way of throwing people off her trail? And just because she may be some sort of asset, someone here to implicate or compromise Elon Musk, doesn't mean that she's necessarily working for Mossad. She could be working for anyone. I mean, obviously, we know she's up for sale. That's why she kind of sold herself to Elon Musk. And now she's for sale to the highest bidder. She got what she wanted out of Elon Musk. Now the next step is, how much money can I get from trying to bring down Elon Musk? Now, if you're someone out there that thinks that this Ashley St. Clair chick doesn't have any power or any leverage over Elon at all, well, I guess you weren't paying attention. You were not looking closely enough at some of these posts of hers that I've been sharing. You see, Ashley herself exposed right here that she has inside connections with people who are running X. Now, of course, Elon owns X, but somehow, some way, she is using her special abilities, I guess her looks, to get in good with the people working at X. So they are going over Elon's head. And let me just read this from Head of Safety. Thanks for the call, Chris. We're bouncing the post for non-consensual nudity. Given that it's paired with a threat to expose as well, we're increasing the timeout period to 1 week. This will also help us get to the right of this news cycle on Ashley. Git is also using the media matching tool to surface additional instances. So to translate this for you guys, Ashley has connections with people high up in Twitter or X, people who are going beyond and above Elon's head to make these moves. Ashley has the power to literally message the people running X for Elon, and she has them censoring people. She has them taking down social media posts that she herself posted, and people just happened to get the screenshots. This chick, you might not think nothing of her. I don't think much of her either. But she has more power than any of us know. She has more power than you, and she damn sure has more power than me. Okay? So right here, she openly admits to these connections in Twitter. She openly basically exposes that she is silencing people, or using her power and leverage to silence people who are calling her out, who are standing up to her, who are exposing her for who she is. Okay? And they even said, hey, we're going to try to get to the right side of this news cycle. So the people running Twitter are going over Elon's head, and they're basically openly admitting that they're going to censor this story, and they're going to try to spread other stuff, propaganda, to get to the right side of this news story. So if you're someone sitting there thinking that Ashley doesn't have any power, boy, oh boy, were you wrong. Now, we know that these people, these forces at play behind the scenes that like to use people like Ashley to gain power over people like Elon Musk, we know that these secret societies, some people would call them the Illuminati. I wouldn't necessarily call them that, but we know that these forces, these powers that play behind the scenes, we know that they're all about their symbolism, okay? They put their symbolism, they put their symbols everywhere. This is something we all know. We've all looked at the photos and videos of the celebrities covering one eye. We know about the pyramids. We know about the symbolism. So when you start looking at some of the photos that Ashley St. Clair has recently shared, it starts kind of painting a clearer picture. Because when Ashley made the announcement about having Elon's baby, she claimed that she was forced to do so, and that all she really wanted was privacy. We know that's bogus, because a few hours later, she literally released an entire tell-all article that included a photo shoot of her, while basically spilling all of the top secret information about her hiding Elon's baby. So we know that this has nothing to do with her privacy, okay? But in the photo shoot that she did, the photo shoot was very odd, to say the least. And it's not something that it's not something that will just bounce out at just anyone, but it bounced out to me, okay? To me, one of the photos in this photo shoot kind of looked like, it stuck out like a sore thumb, but kind of like one of those sore thumbs that you see on the Looney Tunes when they hit their hand with a mallet and like their thumb or their hand like pulsates red and grows like 4 times the size. That's what one of these photos in this photo shoot is doing for me. Because the article is about, coming out about having a child with Elon. You would think that in the photo shoot, Ashley St. Clair would maybe be doing motherly things, but instead she's kind of like in a corset, hanging around, I guess, trying to look powerful and attractive. And one photo out of this photo shoot, and folks, this doesn't happen for no reason, okay? Like I said, we know these people love their symbolism. In the article where she releases all of this dirt about Elon Musk and their secret child, in the photo shoot within that article, there's a photo of her sitting right in front of a chessboard. Now, out of all of the photos to take, why would Ashley St. Clair be taking a photo sitting in front of a chessboard while announcing that she just had a baby by Elon Musk and he's kind of forcing her to keep it a secret? It's almost like they're sending the visual message that they just made a move on the board. It's almost like they're kind of sending a message to Elon Musk that they have him checkmated right now.
Yeah, she got all kinds.
Sure, Elon, you can continue doing what you're doing with Doge, but who knows what might happen to this new child? If you care about this new child you have with Ashley, you might not want to do this. You might not want to expose that. If you don't want Ashley,
about the child, it's about her. They'll do something to her, blame him. That's not good for business. His stocks can crash if she come up dead. And it's even insinuated Elon done it. Come on, man. He take billions of losses in the stock market. They got him.
Coming forward with more information, you might not want to do this. You might not want to expose that. So it stuck out to me. It's clear as day that they didn't take this photo for no reason. This is a power move, okay? You could look at the entire photo shoot. There's nothing feminine.
It's reminding them, whenever you look around them government books, don't forget we own you, boy. Don't play with us. You blame everybody but the small hats for who been stealing from America. I told y'all this was coming.
Or I don't want to say feminine, but there's nothing motherly about it. The woman is sitting in a windowsill looking down on New York City in one photo, and then the other photo, she's sitting in front of the chessboard because she just made a chess move. That's what this is. The other side, whoever the other side may be, whoever may be opposed to what Elon is doing right now, they just made a chess move against him. And Ashley St. Clair is the chess piece that's on their board. Yes, she may be a pawn. I don't think she's a king or a queen. But she's a piece on the board. And they've made their move. The optics, the imagery, it's as clear as day, if you ask me. I made this point over on X, which, by the way, if you're not following me over there, you should be, because I get to a lot of this information quicker over there. But anyways, I made this point over on X, so I would also like to make it here. Regardless of how you feel about it, regardless if you like it or not, Elon is now one of the leading figures of MAGA, right? We all know that. It doesn't matter how you feel about it emotionally. We know that Elon is now one of the leading voices, one of the leading figures, one of the leaders of the MAGA movement. We also all know, regardless if you're part of MAGA or you're against MAGA, we all know they've been trying to take this movement down for years. Now, when Elon wasn't involved in politics and he was just blasting rockets in outer space and making electric cars, what he did in his personal life was one thing. But now Elon has fully entered into the world of politics. Now, I understand the business world and the political world go hand in hand, but also they can be different. Because I don't think anything gets as dirty as how politics gets, right? They get down and dirty when it comes to politics. And right now, Elon is being very sloppy with his actions. He's being very sloppy with these young women. If all it takes is a 20-something-year-old, if that's even her age, if all it takes is a 24-year-old like Ashley St. Clair, if that all it takes, if that is all it takes to implicate or compromise one of the leading figures in the MAGA movement, then we got a long road ahead of us.
Salute, family.
And I'm not sure if we still even have hope to get a lot of the stuff done that we want to be done, if all it's going to take is sending in a couple of 20-year-old semi-attractive social media influencers, if all it takes is throwing a couple of them at Elon Musk, then we're in bad shape. Okay? That's the reality of the situation.
In the world.
Because that is what just happened here. All it takes, apparently, take a attractive woman, throw a MAGA hat on her, and send her to a
richest man in the
Trump
world.
rally.
Control this.
Send her to a right-wing event, and she'll go in there, and all of the right-wing influencers will fall head over heels in love with her. They'll forget their values. They will throw everything they've said online, everything you thought they were about, they will throw it out the window in a heartbeat. All it takes, it doesn't take the full might of the U.S. government, shady politicians, everything that they've thrown at the MAGA movement. But all it takes is a 24-year-old semi-attractive woman in a MAGA hat to implicate Elon in a controversy. And now there's a baby floating around out there that may be used as leverage against him. That's all it took. It didn't take an assassin like what it took with Donald Trump. They used multiple assassins to try to take Donald Trump out. No, all it took was a semi-attractive young girl. Throw him at Elon Musk. We know Elon loves having babies, and bam. And the same thing could be said for the rest of this right-wing movement, if you even want to call it that anymore. Take a cute girl, put a MAGA hat on her, and people lose their minds. Everything goes completely out the window. Okay? But here's the real scary part. Here's the kicker. We know that whatever Ashley's plan was for Elon, it obviously worked. Maybe it didn't work out in the exact way she expected. Maybe she was hoping that Elon would have more of a relationship with her, more of a connection with her. But she got what she wanted. Okay? And ever since this, if you go back and you start looking at Ashley's pictures, what's really scary to me is she already got Elon. It's too late. But now, recently, she's been cozying up to Kash Patel. She's been starting to cozy up to other prominent figures within this MAGA movement. She went directly from getting what she wanted out of Elon, and now it looks like she's trying to catch up Kash Patel in her little honeypot trap as well. So if you thought that this woman was not a cause for concern, boy, oh boy, are you wrong. Because women are men's number one weakness. They always have been. They always will be.
Elon fell for it.
And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily any different. But you got to know how to spot things when you see it. And when you see these things, you need to call it out. You don't need to shy away. I've literally had people in my comments telling me, I should shy away from talking about this. No, we shouldn't.
Salute, crew.
You need to point stuff like this out and try to nip this in the bud as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, we were not able to nip this problem in the bud before she already caught up Elon in her honeypot trap. Hopefully, we can try to get on top of this problem and try to stop this from happening again, but I don't have any faith in that because look at everyone's reaction. Everyone is digging their own grave. Everyone is bringing about the slow destruction of the MAGA movement without realizing that they're doing it. When you go along and you support Ashley St. Clair and you act like this isn't nothing and we shouldn't talk about this, you are actively working towards your own demise. So yeah, when I go to bed tonight, I'm going to be thinking about these photos of her with Kash Patel, and I'm going to be wondering if he's next. And if Ashley was so easily able to do all of this, like literally, who the hell is Ashley? Why is she even close to some of the most powerful people on earth right now? No one can answer that question, but she was able to do this. From simply having semi-good looks and putting on a MAGA hat, pretending to be down with Donald Trump, she was able to get cozy with the most powerful and rich people on planet Earth. Do you not think that everyone else is watching? You don't think that our other enemies are watching? They smell blood in the water, ladies and gentlemen. They've been looking for a weakness. They couldn't find many with Donald Trump. They tried to take him down. It didn't work. The next best thing is Elon. So now they've spotted the weakness. They smell the blood of the water. They have located the chink in the armor, okay? They've located the weak spot in the armor, the vulnerable spot, and now they're going to try to exploit that time and time again. And don't think for 1 second that they're not watching the reaction to this news story, watching how everyone on the right who claims to know and be on top of game when it comes to stuff like this, they're all going along with it like sheep. Okay? And they're watching that. They're watching the reaction, and they're knowing that all of you are playing into their hands, and they can easily do this again. Because most people are afraid to call it out, and the people who do call it out, like me, are being attacked by my own people for pointing out the elephant in the room.
So right now, go to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted. You'll get $30 off plus free shipping. That's twc.health/redacted. And let us know if you're in the United States, if you can get eggs in your grocery store. I've gone to 2 stores, no eggs.
I think when the Biden administration killed hundreds of millions of chickens.
Yeah, shouldn't have done that.
That probably has something to do with it. But hey, who knows? I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Oh, that's a good one, honey.
All right, let's go. Let's talk about this now. So Europe is moving closer to all-out war with Russia and more sanctions, while the United States and Russia are pushing for peace and removing sanctions. It's a tale of two continents right now. And here's Ursula von der Leyen says, I welcome the agreement on our 16th package of sanctions. The EU is clamping down even harder on circumvention by targeting more vessels in Putin's shadow fleet and imposing new import and export bans. We are committed to keep up the pressure on the Kremlin.
Because that's been working so well?
Yeah, it's been working great. Look how you've destroyed Europe's economy, by the way, but the United States economy, by the way. President Trump even talked about inflation yesterday during that press conference, saying that because of this, we've had massive inflation. So it's going to end. Meanwhile, Putin this morning confirmed that the United States and Russia have now formalized relations once again. These relations were canceled, of course, under President Biden. Listen. He says we have taken the first step to resume work in the most diverse areas of mutual interest, including the Middle East and the broad sense of the word. And I mean our presence in Syria, the Palestinian-Israeli settlement, and so on. So basically, across the board, we're normalizing relations now with the United States. Like, what? This all happened in like 3 weeks? Okay. But then the gloves came off, of course. A short time ago, President Trump, this morning, called Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator and said he has a 4% approval rating, which he said last night at that press conference, doubling down on it now. And he called out and he called out the entire Ukraine war as a massive deep state money laundering operation. Wow. What? Okay.
Truth. That's true.
But here's how the USAID-backed BBC News covered it. Watch.
President Trump, in the last few moments, has slammed Ukraine's President Zelensky as a dictator without elections. In the past few minutes, he has posted this on his Truth Social platform. Let me just take you through some of the detail. Quite a lengthy post, as you can see there. He says that President Zelensky refuses.
What did Zelensky think was going to happen when he told Trump, no, you can't get our resources? That don't seem like a good security deal. What? Trump putting an X on his head now. You finished. You're a dictator. You didn't want no peace. I told you Trump said that yesterday. You didn't want no deal. You the reason this happened. He blaming them. He the president of the United States. So you have a 4%, you have a 4% approval rating in your country, dictator Zelensky. It's over for Zelensky.
To have elections is very low in Ukrainian polls. He's claiming that President Zelensky has about a 4% rating. Polls suggest it's 57%. He goes on, the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. He then calls President Zelensky a dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. He goes on.
Yeah, so I love how she's like trying to fact check him in real time. She's like, we here at the BBC, or we know that
don't believe that.
We know that the polls are 57%. That's what, according to polls, it's 57%. No one trusts the BBC anymore. Anyway, of course, the liberals fired back saying it's not true. Zelensky, yes, has a 57% approval rating. Despite what Trump says, 4%. Even Zelensky himself talked about his high approval numbers. Watch.
If someone wants to replace me right now, I would say it won't happen right now, as we are talking about 4%. We have seen this disinformation. We understand it's coming from Russia.
Yeah.
We understand that, and we have proof that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. So unfortunately, President Trump, who we respect a lot as a leader of the nation that we really respect, the American nation, who supported us all the time, unfortunately, he lives in this disinformation space.
Okay, so
the people love me too, Clayton. You just should trust me when I say people love me.
Okay.
That's something that
I always do.
There's no bias there. You know, it's my own take on my approval ratings, and if anybody says they don't, it's disinformation.
So I did a little digging on this today. I wanted to, where are these 57% approval ratings coming from? Like, because liberals jumped all over this. Like, oh no, he's got a 57% approval rating. People love him in Ukraine. Really? Okay, so I did a little digging on this, and I posted this on X a short time ago. And it turns out that the Ukrainian organization that says Zelensky has a 57% approval rating is called the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. And guess what? It just so happens to be a partner of USAID, the United Nations, and the WHO. You can read it right on their website. So as a client, USAID pays the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. So you can definitely trust their 57% approval rating numbers, I'm sure, right? Maybe they are. Maybe they're the best approval rating numbers money can buy from USAID. Anyway, last night, Trump set off a firestorm saying that that Zelensky, in fact, started this war. And I couldn't believe he said the truth out loud. Watch.
But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. It was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad.
Yes,
So
it's sad when you tank the peace deal that happened the second month of the war. Yeah, that's what The U.S. did.
So Zelensky didn't start the war. Ukraine started the war in 2014, of course, after the CIA-backed coup that led to the massive genocide in eastern Ukraine, killing ethnic Russians, kids on their way to school. That's what started this. And it seems to me that people don't know their history at all. It's amazing to see how ignorant American members of Congress, the neocons, who suddenly, they're all being outed about their ignorance about this. It's pretty remarkable to see. It's very simple to pick up a book, and you could see where this genocide started in 2014. Michael McFall, here's a bunch of examples. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. As an American, this is so embarrassing to all Ukrainians, especially the families who've lost loved ones due to Putin's barbaric invasion and terrorism. I apologize. Then another one, a call to activism. Holy crap. Trump says Zelensky should never have started the war with Russia. Putin started the war by invading Ukraine. He's literally spreading Putin talking points from the podium. What a disgraceful a-hole. Here's Representative Don Bacon. Putin started this war. Putin committed war crimes. Putin is the dictator who murdered his opponents. The EU nations have contributed more to Ukraine. Zelensky polls well over 50%. Again, taking the propaganda. Ukraine wants to be a part of the West. Putin hates the West. I don't accept George Orwell's doublethink.
Man, Trump said, you give us 500 billion in rare earth minerals, and we'll look out for you. Zelensky said no, and then this is what happened. You a dictator who started this war. You got 4% approval rating. You the problem. Everybody can believe it. Why not? Trump told him, give us 500 billion in rare earth minerals, and this won't happen to you. But now that Trump can't take this back. He can't say, oh, you know what? You're not a dictator, and your people like you. Oh, no, this is the end for Zelensky, and none of this matters. Trump is the president of the United States. So it's official U.S. policy that Zelensky is a dictator who started this war.
Okay.
Of course, none of that is true.
Well, it's true if you only joined the Earth in 2022.
Right. If you don't understand history, it's true to you. But even Jens Stoltenberg, the former head of NATO, let the cat out of the bag when he said this about 2014.
Didn't start in February last year. The war started in 2014, and since 2014, NATO allies have provided support to Ukraine with training, with equipment.
Oh, okay. Where was the outrage from liberals then? I can't believe he's spreading Putin talking points from the NATO podium, but they didn't. So we're going to have a lot more on this with Gilbert Doctorow in just a few moments as we unpack the latest here, but we've got more news.
Well, we're learning a lot more about the company promote the fact that their flights have no men.
Of course, concerns about the efficacy and harm on Piers Morgan's show, but this one is a bit shorter. So
the reason that these titles were given, and they
Russia and China, so we're not done. Well, while the media freaks out about the diplomacy with Russia, our next guest, American academic Gilbert Doctorow, says that having respect for Putin and diplomacy with Russia makes you a great American patriot because you then recognize the power of peace, diplomacy, instead of constant provocation. He's been warning for years about the neocons led by John McCain trying to get a war with Russia. He warned about the Obama administration's provocation with Russia, particularly around the way we covered the Olympics. Now he says the Trump administration is doing the right thing, but may use this advantage to drive a wedge between Russia and China. So we're not done here. Gilbert Doctorow, thank you so much for joining us and coming back to Redacted.
No, my pleasure to be with you.
So you live in Europe, so it's late for you. We really appreciate your time. Do you think this diplomacy with Russia is what we've needed all along? And can you explain why you've been warning about this for over a decade?
We're going back to 2015 when I first wrote a book, Does Russia Have a Future? By Mentors of Great Power. And I followed that up a couple of years later, Does America Have a Future? And the reason that these titles were given and they are linked is that since about 2010, 2012, the United States has been determined to remove Russia as a major power and as a global competitor. And it has staked its own fortune on that very policy, so that the success or failure in the attack on Russia has had direct implications for America's success as a great power. And we see that today. These things have come together. Every attempt by the American administrations, successive administrations, from Obama on, to handicap Russia, to weaken Russia, have come back and harmed the American position in the world. It has finally taken Donald Trump to have the courage to face these facts and this reality, and to begin to normalize relations with Russia in the hope of extracting some kind of global advantage. And I think the global advantage will come in realpolitik, or realistic politics tradition, going back to the conclusion of World War II, and what was the Yalta Agreement between the three great powers, the meetings of Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. This is in the cards, and you'll notice that there were three baskets of things to do that came out of the Riyadh meetings a day ago, and the three baskets were first to restore something approaching normalcy in diplomatic relations, because you cannot proceed to work on the Ukraine war situation, to work on all of the open issues where the United States and Russia can have common interests in a constructive way, if you don't have the manpower, the experts in place, the communications in place. And they were almost severed completely by the Biden administration. So we don't even have ambassadors in place in Moscow or Washington. So that is one basket, to restore normal diplomatic communications for problem solving. The second is a variety of individual identified areas of common interest where there can be constructive US-Russian relations, and including that, resolving the Ukraine war. And then the third basket is precisely what you were suggesting, geopolitics. It was named precisely by the three Americans delegation who gave their press conference following the meeting with the Russians in Riyadh. It was called the geopolitical questions. And that primarily is the relations that Russia has with China, with Iran, with North Korea. And but you'll notice, because there are three baskets, addressing that question of geopolitics and the American wish list to drive a wedge does not prevent progress on the first 2 points. The first basket is to be addressed immediately. That's clear. They can't go anywhere without having proper diplomatic services in place. I don't mean consulates. That's very nice. But the embassies themselves are undermanned. And the Russian embassy in Washington is so hamstrung by various limitations, including the fact that their bank accounts aren't operational. They have been cut off from SWIFT. They can't even pay their bills. The Russian embassy in Washington. That is the first thing that will clearly be resolved in the next week or two. Then they move on
Gilbert,
to these issues.
So I was going to ask you, Gilbert, on the European side. So you're hearing a lot of hand-wringing on the European side over the past 24 hours, that they're not really being brought to the table. They seem really upset about this. Ursula von der Leyen wanting to push additional sanctions now on Russia, while at the same time, Marco Rubio and the Secretary of State for the United States is wanting to pull back on sanctions against Russia. What do you make of this détente?
Well, if after this succession of amazing developments, starting with President Trump's 90-minute telephone call with Vladimir Putin, there about which we heard very little as content, but the next day we heard a lot about content, or later that day when Pete Hegseth made his debut here in Brussels, speaking to the Ukraine support group or coordinating group, and he delivered the double whammy that Ukraine is not going to restore its pre-war boundaries, and that Ukraine is not going to enter NATO. So that was the first real shock treatment. Then more came towards the weekend. Of course, there was J.D. Vance's speech in the Munich conference, which was set up to underline the division between Europe and the United States, and I'd say to bring out this division in a way that that the whole world can understand. That one is the peace camp, and the other is a war camp. This was done by Vance's discussing why Europe is not democratic, why Europe is its own worst enemy and is defeating its security by this authoritarian, Soviet-style censorship, deprivation of freedom of speech, and exclusion of large parts of the population, the populist parties on the right, the populist parties on the left, from equal participation in political life in their countries. That really shook up the leaders, political leaders, military leaders of Europe at the conference, and people who covered it in the newspapers here. I think now of the Le Monde, which had Sylvia Kaufman, who's a well-known personality in British news and in the New York Times op-ed pages, a long-time Le Monde New York bureau chief. She was writing yesterday in Le Monde how the speech by J.D. Vance was fascist and hostile. So you've got the division here, almost irreparable division, has come up, and that served the purposes of Trump. And he went and made the rift still wider, knowing full well what he was doing. When the State Department sent out a questionnaire to all the Europeans saying, well, you're very unhappy that you're not yet participating in the talks. And this was, of course, the big conversation point through all of Europe on this weekend. Shock that the American talks with the Russians did not include either Kiev or, more importantly, themselves. They were not uninvited to this. And all of them know English well enough and American political law well enough to understand the concept that if you don't have a seat at the table, it means you're on the menu. So they understood that they were on the menu.
That's right.
And then this rift was driven by the questionnaire, as I said, a questionnaire which had the intent of saying, look, gentlemen, put up or shut up. You say you want to have a role here. So what are you going to do? What are you going to put up for to enforce a peace agreement that we all will reach and to provide security for Ukraine, which you say is your objective? Of course, here was a great opportunity. Mr. Macron does not let any crisis go without his participating in a solution. And so he rallied Europeans, the key countries, to Paris for a meeting on Monday. And these were key countries involved in support of Ukraine. Of course, there was zone France, Germany, UK, Spain was there, Italy was there, and a few other odds and ends. But of course, the NATO was represented by Secretary General Rutte, the governing, the highest executive of the European institutions, the European Council is represented by Da Costa, its president. And of course, von der Leyen. Escape, you cannot avoid von der Leyen. She had to show up. Well, after 4 hours of deliberations, it was a failure. They couldn't agree on anything. And I think it was intentional.
I want to ask you about that, actually, because they have to reposition themselves after trailing behind Joe Biden for 4 years. And so the United States, we know Trump is telling the truth that Ukraine started the war first, but really it's our own government. It's the CIA that prompted Ukraine to start attacking those people. So the bad guy behind the bad guy is our own government, the United States intelligence. The Europeans have pretended not to know that and have just promoted this propaganda of Putin's unprovoked aggression. It is the modern day equivalent of weapons of mass destruction. Can European leaders save face now because they're so far up the backside of the old Biden narrative? Forgive me for asking it that way.
Let's be more discriminating here, where you've got the Brits and you've got the continental Europeans. The most aggressive people, far more aggressive than the United States, from the get-go, have been the British. And let's be specific about this. So many events around the development of the Ukraine war, and in particular as regards the terrorist activities by Ukraine, the attacks, various attacks in Russia, scandals that were meant to do harm to the credibility of Mr. Putin, and like the death of Navalny. These are all orchestrated by whom? By the CIA? No, by MI6. Now, we all go back to 2003 and the Iraq War, and it was commonplace to say the special relationship between Britain and the United States meant that Tony Blair was the lapdog of the American President Bush. What's happened since is that lapdog has become the attack dog. The MI6 and the Brits have been out in front. They have been the most aggressive, the most destructive in the war in Ukraine. Who was it, after all, who persuaded Zelensky not to go to sign the already initialed peace agreement with Russia on April 15th, more or less, 2022? It was the visit of Boris Johnson. Now, it's easy to say that he did the bidding of Washington, but I think that is a simplification. The Brits had their own agency, and it was to lead the Americans into this disaster because they knew better. Who had the contacts with Ukrainian agents that enabled the murder of Navalny? It was the MI6. It wasn't the CIA. So who could have been involved in the scandalous Bucha massacre that was used to persuade Europeans to sign on to the American sanctions from hell that Victoria Nuland and her team had prepared? It was the Brits. So let's divide this a bit. Mr. Macron, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. And he will go this way or that way where he sees the opportunities. But the Brits are stuck. And if I were Mr. Starmer, I would think twice about this trip in the coming week to Washington. Because now that Zelensky has been denounced by the president as a dictator, I don't know what he thinks he can achieve by visiting the Oval Office.
Going to the Oval Office to campaign on behalf of a dictator who's canceled elections and murdered political opponents and American journalists. Like, I don't think the White House is going to be very forgiving for that, reading the temperature of the room in the United States. Americans are sick of it. I see people right now in our chat room, they're sick of it. They're sick of us propping up this propaganda in Ukraine. Gilbert, we'll get you out of here on this. I know it's 10:30 there in Brussels where you are right now, so we'll let you get back to your evening. Final question here. NATO, big rumors floating around right now maybe not a rumor, in the German newspaper Bild just published saying, and similar to the Financial Times, that the United States is ready to leave NATO and get out of NATO altogether. What do you make of that, and what would that mean for the future of NATO?
Let's use a little bit of Sovietology here and parse the words of Mr. Trump. Just notice what he said in the last day. We will not take all of our troops out of Europe. We will not take all of our. That means it's a lot more than the 20,000 with troops taken out that we heard about 10 days ago. Even the Brits acknowledge, even Starmer acknowledges, that they can do nothing in Ukraine without American presence, without the Americans providing the logistics, the the satellite intelligence and the rest of it. So as the United States cuts its forces in Europe, Europe is defenseless. And being defenseless, they will have to acknowledge that they are alone against a big Russian neighbor, and they damn well better do something to accommodate themselves to the Russian neighbor, and instead of sending in new sanctions, which cannot be enforced without American backing. That is a situation. I cannot see that the present leadership in the European institutions can stay in place. I say Mr. Macron can talk out of both sides of his mouth. I don't think that Ursula von der Leyen or Kaja Kallas have that luxury. I think they're going to be on the street.
On the street.
Wow. All right. That's a prediction. And I had forgotten the case that you made for the British actually killing Alexei Navalny. I refer you to the piece we did with Mr. Doctor recently. Please look that up on Redacted and subscribe to his newsletter because it has a lot of bombshells. This guy, he's a great researcher.
Yeah, our chat room is just saying, wow, what an incredible guest. So thank you, Gilbert. Thank you for staying up late for us there in Belgium. You are in a nest of vipers there in the middle of Brussels.
Actually listened to Secretary of Defense Hegseth. He was at the Ramstein group, NATO, essentially, his comments on NATO and Ukraine.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Brian, it appears that what Hegseth is saying is that, especially in the initial stages, the big impetus is about getting the United States to transfer the responsibility for Ukraine. So, Brian, your thoughts?
I mean, what have we been saying for 3 years, Danny? Not just myself, but many other great guests that you've had on and interviewed over the last 3 years. That eventually Ukraine is going to collapse, and they need to create the U.S. and NATO need to create a buffer zone with their own troops inside whatever is left of Ukraine. I've been talking about this for 3 years. I've been warning about that being they're never going to accept defeat in Ukraine, and they will go ahead and they will do this. And they want to make sure that it's a non-NATO deployment because they want to absolve themselves from Article 5 obligations, and they don't want U.S. troops in there because they themselves don't want to get into a direct war with Russia, because this is all about overextending Russia, collapsing Russia, so the U.S. can isolate and then work on collapsing China. That's the whole point of all of this. It's all interconnected. And so they cannot get tangled. And I've said this many times, if the U.S. gets involved in Ukraine, I mean directly intervening, putting their troops in Ukraine, they're not going to have any resources left. We can see how stretched their military is. They're not going to have any resources left for the Middle East or for the Asia-Pacific region, where they're still trying to reassert dominance. So they have to make difficult decisions. And and this was the theme all throughout the Biden administration. Their allies, their proxies, European nations, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, all of these nations, they want to use them, essentially, use them because the US itself is overstretched. They're talking about using the industrial capacity of these nations, their military capabilities, their economy, and basically consolidating all of it. It's like a bunch of companies run very poorly, like the U.S. auto industry, and then it begins to collapse, and they consolidate them all together in some last-ditch effort to try to save something. That is what the United States empire is doing right now. And this is, and again, if you were paying attention and you filter out the left-right rhetoric, you could recognize that what Secretary Hegseth is saying is exactly what was being said all throughout the Biden administration. And this is what's so troubling, because it is this continuity of agenda so seamless, and yet because of people's bias, their political bias and their emotions, they're simply not seeing it. It's very frustrating, but it's very important that people wake up and see this and oppose this, because we're going in a very, very dangerous direction. The U.S. is basing its foreign policy on an irrational premise that a nation that makes up less than 5% of the world can have domination over the other 95+%. This is irrational. And when you pursue irrational policies like this on such a large scale, and we have nuclear weapons involved, it could only end in catastrophe for everybody. And so this is what we need to start thinking about. Not, I voted for this guy, I want my team to win, and I don't really even care if anything they're saying is true or not. I just want to feel like we're winning. Is that more important than continuing down this road toward catastrophic global conflict?
If Donald Trump doesn't do what he's doing right now, Donald Trump is going to make himself very irrelevant very fast. When I look at this development, I see that this is massively different rhetorically, and even, picking up the phone, talking to Vladimir Putin. This is different. How we interpret why it's different, I think, depends on how we want to see the reality. For me, I see it as, if they do not do this, if Trump doesn't do this, he's irrelevant. But all throughout this, Brian, even Hegseth, even Trump, they've all been saying they're going to increase sanctions
to further enable effective diplomacy and drive down energy prices that fund the Russian war machine. President Trump is unleashing American energy production and encouraging other nations to do the same. Lower energy prices, coupled with more effective enforcement of energy sanctions, will help bring Russia to the table. Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine.
I mean, Hegseth did this a bunch, where he would continuously refer to the need to put everything on Europe, basically saying, Europe, you're up. This is your conflict now. But your thoughts about this sanctions bit? It would be very interesting to see Donald Trump bring this to the table, because it's a non-starter.
This is literally a continuation of what the Biden administration was doing. I mean, if you weren't looking and you weren't familiar with his voice, and you weren't aware that an election took place, you would swear that this was just another day in the Biden administration. This is all they've went on about for the last 3 years. Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions on Russia. They're still talking about it. If you go to the think tanks where all of this foreign policy comes from, again, regardless of who is in the White House or who controls Congress, this is all the think tanks are talking about. They're looking for every little sanction, but even the think tanks understand that the sanctions aren't working, and they probably aren't going to work, but they don't know what else to do. So again, this goes back to the core issue, which goes even beyond NATO. It is America wanting to maintain primacy over the entire planet. And it is physically incapable of doing it, but it insists on trying anyway. And so this is what happens. You have sanctions that don't work. You have a military that's overstretched and cannot keep up with these nations that the US is targeting, especially Russia, especially China. And then we just see a continuation of them going in these circles with the only tools that they have, even though they tried to pretend that some sort of political transition did take place between the Biden and Trump administration. They're still waving around the same set of tools that they have been trying to use to get Russia to the table, get them to at least freeze the conflict so that they can reprioritize with war with China. And by the way, war with China is still war with Russia. It is ultimately is a war on the multipolar world. And so it doesn't really matter who you're targeting. If you're targeting any one of these nations that are pillars of the multipolar world, you're attacking the entire multipolar world. And so people have to try to understand this. I mean, why is he still talking about sanctions? And did you notice he's still talking about weapons flowing to Ukraine? He's just saying We're not going to do it. Why are we not going to do it? Because we don't have any left. And we need to save the weapons that we have left for all these other wars that we're planning. By the way, where does Europe get a lot of its weapons from? From the United States. So, I mean, these are all things that, look past the headlines, listen to what they're actually saying. They are telling you nothing has changed, and that they're just doubling down on everything that they've been doing up until now.
And I would argue, Brian, that a lot of the reasons why Europe is losing its mind is not so much because now it feels like there's going to be some significant burden it's going to have to bear. In truth, Europe can't bear any kind of burden on anything really, because it is so dependent on the United States. You know that the United States essentially controls these countries, especially at the level of foreign policy and quote unquote national security. Because what the Trump administration is doing is it, which I believe is a big part of its political orientation, which has served to change its approach and works for this approach. Joe Biden, as a neocon, very passionate American interventionist, he can't say, "Well, we're just in it for ourselves." But Donald Trump can say, "Well, it's all about the United States. Who cares about anything else in the world?" That's what they can do, and I think that's what's allowing them to actually engage in this right now as a way to buy some time. But here is what Hegseth had to say, though, about American isolationism, but with a bit of a China twist. Here we go.
We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes.
The border and China, those are the big threats, actually, and they will deter China and with the resourcing needs possible to ensure that this peer competitor does not get too powerful. So, Brian, your reaction to this?
But exactly. Again, continuity of agenda. This is what the Biden administration was obsessed with, ultimately China. And even though people like to pick, people on the right like to pick on the Biden administration, they like to call President Biden Beijing Biden. But in reality, throughout the entire Biden administration, they were preparing for war with China. That was the top priority. This conflict with Russia is meant to isolate China before the U.S. focuses entirely on China. If you have been following along over the last 2 decades, China building up its Belt and Road Initiative to circumvent possible maritime choke points, the U.S. is already preparing to cut off Chinese maritime shipping through. The U.S. has been desperately trying to cut the Belt and Road Initiative over land. If China shares this long border with Russia, and these two nations are allies, the huge amount of natural resources that Russia possesses, the ability to move trade through Russia to many other countries, you can't isolate China. You need to diminish, overstretch, and if possible, topple and then politically capture Russia to then further and fully cut off China. That is the whole strategy. It has been since the end of World War II. This is all that they've been doing for decades and decades, again, regardless of which administration is in power. And Secretary Hegseth is tying this to the border because if he just explained what the U.S. is really trying to do, the U.S. wants to be the preeminent power in the Asia-Pacific region. In Asia, where the U.S. isn't even located on a map. American people would say, why are we doing that? So they have to tie China to the U.S. border, to fentanyl, to illegal immigration, to it's demagoguery. It's to scare the American people. It's to incite fear and hatred and panic. It's just another pretext, a false pretext the U.S. is using to legitimize its foreign policy, just like they lied about WMDs in Iraq, or they lied about human rights violations in Libya or Syria. They're doing the exact same thing vis-a-vis Russia and China, and ultimately they're trying to tie everything to China. Again, I don't blame people for not sitting down for 4 hours and listening to Senator Marco Rubio while he was going through his confirmation hearing as Secretary of State. But for 4 hours, that's all he talked about was China. China this, China that. China is the root of all of our problems, and we have to deal with China, which is all they said for 4 years under the Biden administration, 4 years under the previous Trump administration, 8 years of Obama, and so on and so forth. It is the continuation of this policy. Ultimately, they need to stop China from surpassing the collective West. If it surpasses the collective West, it'll do so irreversibly. And this is simply something the special interests that control the collective West cannot tolerate. They just, on so many levels, they cannot tolerate it. And so that is what is driving all of this foreign policy, ultimately. Now, I mean, how do people listen to that and walk away thinking that anything has changed in terms of U.S. foreign policy? I don't understand it.
Well, for me, Brian, what seems to be changing here is not so much the what is the ultimate agenda, right? I don't believe the United States is going to quit on trying to contain the multipolar world, to weaken it, to destroy it, with China at the head. I don't believe that it wants to allow Russia to continue on a path of stability and growth. However, it seems like the how is really in question. The how now the difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration can be viewed as, well, how does this occur? And what is really at stake here, it feels like, Brian, is that we are in a moment where the Trump administration ultimately seems to be expressing an admission of defeat. Even Trump, when he talks about BRICS, 100% tariffs, he reiterated that today, I defeated BRICS. Nobody batted an eye at the tariffs that were being proposed against BRICS. Nobody said, well, we're not going to join BRICS because of that. But a lot of this bluster mixed with attempts to kind of stall, it feels like it's more of a, well, what is the next move, rather than what is the best move for peace? What is the next move for empire? That's what it feels like for me. What does it feel like for you?
That's exactly it. It's what is the next move for the U.S. empire? Nothing is working, and they need to reorganize, regroup, and redirect their efforts, their energy, their resources. That's all this is. It is all just rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking ship that is American imperialism. That's what has been from administration to administration. That's what it continues to be. When the Trump administration says America first, the MAGA movement is just branding slapped on the continuation of U.S. hegemony worldwide. That's all it is. If you ask me, what does America first mean? I would say it should mean leaving the rest of the world alone and investing inward. Doesn't mean isolationism. You can trade with everybody. You can trade and deal with absolutely everyone, but invest inward on your own country. Build a real economy that is based on actually making tangible things, not playing with numbers on spreadsheets, but actually making physical things. I don't know, kind of like how China and Russia, why their economies are able, I was listening to the Hudson Institute the other day, one of these think tanks, corporate funded think tanks, and they were complaining about how they used to joke about how small the Russian GDP was, and all of these stereotypes about how weak and pathetic the Russian economy is. But it turns out that they admitted this, what the GDP is actually made up of is very important. So the U.S. has a massive GDP, but if all of it is pyramid schemes on spreadsheets, then what real meaning does it have in the physical world? When you go to war, how does that actually physically, tangibly help you. It turns out the Russian economy is based on natural resources and manufacturing, which gives it tremendous power. So it's a much smaller GDP, but it packs a bigger punch. And so this is what America needs to look inward and do. They need to build a real economy. They need to prioritize the American people over these corporations that place profit above all other purposes, including the self-preservation of America as a functioning nation state. But what does America first really mean for the Trump administration? It means putting these corporate financier special interests first. That is what the tariffs are there to do, to preserve and reassert American corporate monopolies, all of the monopolies they have over the auto industry, telecommunications, including things like smartphones, everything that the US held monopolies over for decades. That is what this is all meant to preserve. All US foreign policy is aimed at preserving the corporate financier interests. That's what they mean by America first. And it by no means investing inward on America. It means reasserting American dominance over the entire planet. I was listening to Jamison Greer, the US trade representative, during his confirmation hearing before the Senate. And literally in his opening statement, he said that all trade policy should contribute to making America dominant in all areas, economics, military, technology. That is the actual goal here. That is the actual agenda. And that transcends all presidential administrations. Again, if you look through the rhetoric, they're saying it. They're telling you this.
There's a lot of hope beyond hope, right? They always say cope beyond cope. Like a lot of hope that this will lead to a confirmation of what Donald Trump and whatever U.S. political figure says they are, without regard to what exactly could happen, should happen, and will happen. Because I think what should happen, of course, is everything that you said. The United States should do exactly as you said. Donald Trump literally just axed what wasn't even happening, which is, I think, a testament to a lot of what Donald Trump is doing right now, is axing the high-speed rail in California project. That's never going to happen. Well, it wasn't happening anyway, but it is a testament to, well, yeah, there isn't a commitment to building up the United States at all. There isn't a commitment to improving its infrastructure. Actually, there's a commitment to pushing away, even with regard to Taiwan and China. There's a huge push to keep them away, keep their tariffs. What that does is actually keeps things away. So advancements like what China's done with renewables, like what Taiwan and China now increasingly are doing with semiconductors, all that will be kept away because that's what tariffs are. They are a tax on the American people, which actually keeps away the kind of investment that's needed to learn how to do certain things, like maybe build better electric cars, which Elon Musk can't do anymore. He laughed back in the day. Ha 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 ha. China will never catch up to us. Now China has. They build better electric cars, cheaper.
I remember
better.
that.
And now there's 100% tariffs on them that I haven't heard Donald Trump want to reverse.
Have over $32 trillion in equity.
Glad that it reached him.
And a little bit about North Korea. But before we get there, first to Ukraine, what was your reaction to President Trump's statement yesterday that, and I'm quoting him, Ukraine should never have started the war against Russia?
Well, I greeted that with a tremendous sigh of relief and also a certain amount of admiration for President Trump, because President Trump, when shown the truth, recognized it finally. And I don't know why it took as long as it did, but I'm glad that it reached him. And he's now telling everyone what you, I, and a lot of other people have been saying for 3 years. And this is the first dramatic step in the direction of normalizing relations with Russia, for which he deserves enormous applause and gratitude from us.
Well, fully agreed. Of course, today, his words got even sharper when he referred to President Zelensky as, quote, a dictator who has canceled elections, who played Biden like a fiddle. Colonel, it almost sounds like he's watching the show, but your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think it's very difficult to play Biden like a fiddle, let's be frank. I think a lot of people fiddled with Biden for 4 years. And the people most mightily responsible for the big lies and the terrible, terrible things we've done to the people of Ukraine, as well as to the Russians. I mean, we're mightily responsible for over 1 million Ukrainian deaths and almost 100,000 Russian deaths. And it's a good thing. It's also a courageous thing that he stood up and said it. But Zelensky is a criminal, and I think that's begun to sink in. And perhaps Elon Musk and his friends can do to Zelensky and this terrible government in Ukraine what they've done here. We might as well expose this entire fraud.
I'm reminded of something I reported several times. It wasn't just I who reported it. Congressman Thomas Massie in the House and Senator Rand Paul in the Senate introduced amendments each time there was an appropriation to Ukraine, providing for a team of American inspectors general on the ground. The Republican Speaker of the House, and at the time, the Democratic Majority Leader in the Senate, would not let either of those proposals come to a vote, Colonel.
Yeah, well, this is the uniparty. And once you move past Senator Paul and obviously his father, who's a great man, and Thomas Massie, who's a man of enormous character and backbone and intelligence, there isn't much hope. People don't like to stand up to falsehoods, especially when it pays handsomely to support falsehoods.
How shrewd was it for Foreign Minister Lavrov in his opening statement yesterday you'll see in a minute why I'm smiling, in his opening statement yesterday in Riyadh, looking right into Secretary of State Rubio's eyes, also looking at Steve Witkoff, to remind the American delegation that as a result of Joe Biden's sanctions, American businesses lost in the past 3.5 years, $330 billion in income.
Yep. This is what no one in Washington has wanted to admit. And I'm a little disappointed because Secretary Rubio has announced that we're not lifting sanctions just yet.
Oh, I can't believe that. But anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting you. It just personally aggravates me.
Yeah, I don't know if he consulted with the president. I think the president has rightly decided this is all nonsense. The sanctions need to be lifted completely. He wants to normalize relations with Moscow. He needs to make that abundantly clear to Secretary Rubio, because this is a very unnecessary and insulting remark, as though, first of all, we've had any effect, and we haven't. If anything, you and I know Russia is stronger and more capable today than it was 4 years ago. And much of that is due to us and our stupidity. And not that I object to a strong Russia. You and I never have. We see that as a positive thing on the world stage. It's not a negative thing.
Right.
But Rubio, I don't think is completely on board yet. Now, I don't know about Steve Witkoff. He strikes me as being someone who's a little more savvy, and he has the president's trust and confidence. It's been my experience that when you listen to the people in the room speaking, I'm talking about the Americans, the one man who says almost nothing is usually the smartest, and that's Witkoff. And I think Lavrov was trying to make a point. And the thing we have to understand now, and I'm sure President Trump grasps much of this, there's no trust between them and us. That's been completely destroyed. This insistence on this false narrative about Russia's criminality, Russia's responsibility for what happened, Russia's atrocities, all this nonsense, that's not going to be forgotten quickly. Not just by the government. People here in the United States don't understand. The entire Russian population remains enraged. And just because we step forward and say, look, this was wrong. And, from the very beginning, I kept urging publicly, because I have no way to address the president directly, stand there and tell everybody, this is not my war. I didn't start it. I don't want it. And I'm going to end it and let it go. He's finally gotten there now, and he's beginning to say those things. That's going to help enormously, but he can't undo the damage quickly. And we're not going to get a shake and bake plan for immediate cessation of all hostilities. It's going to take time. And we have to understand that Russia has won this war. We have to be very careful about what we demand at all. In fact, I would argue we shouldn't demand a damn thing. What we should urge is rapprochement. Let's come up with a new security architecture. Let's bury this thing finally and irrevocably and move forward. And I think that's what President Trump wants to do. I just hope that the people working for him get it.
Colonel, I fully agree with you, but of course I'm your student. This is not my field of expertise, and you and a lot of the others have educated me. But what leverage does the American side have when they're in these these high-level meetings?
None that they think they've got, but they do have one thing going for them, and that is honesty, integrity. Step forward and say exactly the things that President Trump has said, make it abundantly clear where we want to go in the future, and listen carefully to what they say. When McFarlane, I think it was McFarlane that I may have his name wrong, who was ambassador in Moscow under Obama, when he arrived, President Putin leaned over and said to him privately in the ear, "You don't listen. We need to listen. We need to listen more than we speak right now." This is not because we're being humiliated. That has nothing to do with it. Acknowledging the truth is not a humiliation. It's a liberation.
Right.
And that's the way Trump looks at it. And I'm sure he does. And he's right. This is not about winning anything. If we're going to win something, let's win the fight for a better world where the truth prevails and war is scarce.
Chris, can you put up the full screen you've just crafted? This is President Trump on Truth Social just about an hour ago. I'm going to read it aloud for the benefit of those who are just listening to the show. Think of it, Donald Trump. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization? In that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean as a separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent to him is, and here the president has the word in caps and in quotes, missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he is good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. Colonel McGregor.
Yeah, it's a remarkable and brilliant formulation. I mean, it's 99% correct. The only point I would make to him, I know he points to these oceans, and this is more important to Europe than us. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. But Russia is also a Pacific power. Russia is also a power in Central Asia. And Russia is enormously important to us from the standpoint of its influence and its leadership in those areas. And obviously, Russia's close relationship with China, which is a de facto alliance, is also important. If you're interested in peace, and I think President Trump is, and you'll recall many times I've said, if he'll just follow his instincts and ignore the stupidity that's issued from people's mouths around him, he will be enormously successful and we will have peace. Well, now you've seen it, and thank God for it. But we need more than just a normalization. We need a good relationship with Moscow. And together, we can have enormously positive impact. And frankly, it can help us with China and Northeast Asia. And we need help and assistance there as well.
So these negotiations, which will continue behind the scenes, which will continue to exclude Europe, which poignantly will continue to exclude President Zelensky or anybody from Ukraine. What are the prospects for a meaningful, global, big settlement?
Well, as this progresses, and I'm assuming that it will, and we exercise some patience, and we send a team that's prepared to sit there for 6 months, not just 6 weeks, work carefully with the Russians to craft this new security arrangement, Europe will inevitably come along. Both President Trump and President Putin understand that the governments in Europe are about to change. They're swinging decisively to the right, not to the far right, contrary to what people say, but to the right, and to a nationalist right that seeks justice for its own population, security for its own population, borders that are meaningful, language, history, identity, culture, all of those things wrapped together, which is exactly what Russia stands for, which is, I think, one of the reasons Biden and the globalist community were so interested in trying to destroy it, because Russia was a metaphor for everything they hate and despise. A Orthodox Christian country with a language, a culture, a heritage, and a sense of national identity that refuses to be extinguished. There's nothing intolerant about it. Remember, Russia has at least 20 million Muslims living inside its borders. And we've tried over many, many years with the CIA, along with MI6, to drive a wedge between them. I'm talking about the Muslim Turks or Turkic peoples and the Russians. And it's failed miserably because the Russians have pursued a very intelligent policy of tolerance and understanding. So this nationalism is not something hateful or frightening or bad. And I think that's going to overtake Europe. And as that overtakes Europe, I think President Trump and President Putin will enjoy great stature in Europe together. They will both be seen as people that have brought something very positive back to Europe that, frankly, has been missing. And you know that from your trips to Italy and Switzerland. This is something that could be enormously good for them. Now, as far as the global picture is concerned, that will take time. But if we hammer out this new security architecture with the Russians, it makes sense, and work with them, then I think our position with the Chinese will also improve greatly. The Chinese, as we've discussed many, many times, they are not about war. They don't want a war. They're about business. And, it's like the old story, if you leave your wallet on the table, somebody's going to pick it up and take it. Well, if you expect the Chinese to stand around and not take your IP when you present it to them in your own laboratories and universities, well, you're crazy. So we have some policing and work here at home to do to safeguard ourselves, but there's no justification or rationale for war with China. So all of this works together. And as I said it earlier yesterday, if President Trump presses forward in these directions, I would think he and probably President Putin jointly could receive the Nobel Peace Prize for what they're doing.
Well, that would be remarkable. Transitioning to the Middle East, where the president appears to be in lockstep with Joe Biden, maybe even outdoing what Joe Biden gave to Benjamin Netanyahu. Ritter informs us that some of these Moabs, the mother of all bombs, you're more familiar with this than I am, are of such weight and size and magnitude, the Israelis don't even have planes from which to drop them, meaning American planes would have to do so. But before we get to the specifics, are IDF troops in Egypt as we speak, Colonel?
In Egypt, in what sense? I haven't
physically located there.
Not that I'm aware. It's not impossible because that's a long border with Egypt. It reaches all the way down to Eilat at the Gulf of Aqaba. And it's not difficult to cross that border. I would think if the Israelis sent anyone in there, they would probably be the equivalent of our special ops. And I know the Israelis are the paranoia flag, and Israel is at full mast because Egypt's effectively mobilized for war. And this is the problem that our president now confronts. He's dealing with Netanyahu, who has enormous power and influence inside the United States, as we know. And he has tried to fulfill his promises to Miriam Adelson and others that contribute a lot of money to him. But he's put himself now at great risk. And I'm talking about President Trump and us. Because Netanyahu, ultimately, at the end of the day, is going to do what Netanyahu wants. And right now, whatever we think, he thinks that he has an opportunity to reshape the Middle East to Israel's preference. And that means the war with Iran is by no means off the table. In fact, many of those bombs that we saw delivered quite recently are no doubt destined for Iran, and the Iranians know it. They also are quite confident that they have us to support them in whatever they do, certainly with air and naval power. But they're also aware that Egypt and Jordan are now both on the precipice of boiling over into war with Israel.
What is the Egyptian strategic dilemma right now?
Well, Egypt faces a problem on three fronts that most Americans aren't aware of. They have a problem on their western flank with Libya. Libya, as you know, we removed Gaddafi, and it went through a terrible civil war. At the moment, it's divided in the middle. And General Haftar, who was a former CIA asset that used to live in Annandale, Virginia, is leading the forces in the east of Libya. And it is really Mr. Erdogan, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Turks in the west. The Egyptians are very afraid of this Muslim Brotherhood and its links to ISIS, which is why they regard Erdogan as someone who is not to be trusted. And then to the south, they have a problem in Ethiopia and Sudan. It's a water problem. And the Israelis have been down in Ethiopia working with the government, cultivating support to dam up more of the Nile River, with the full recognition that if they dam up any more of it, not much water is going to reach Egypt. And that's going to put Egyptian agriculture and industry and the economy at very severe risk. So now they're looking at the Palestinian issue. They live next door. They understand what happens if those Palestinians are either killed or driven out of Gaza. And they're not prepared to accept that. So they're sitting right now in that Philadelphia corridor, right along the border. They've made a lot of bellicose sounds. I think an Egyptian general said that he could be in Jerusalem, or not Jerusalem, I think Tel Aviv or something, in 12 hours. I think that's not impossible, but I wouldn't say so publicly, but it's had an effect. And the Egyptians are now lobbying us, I think, to do whatever we can to hold back the Egyptians. Now, there's an Arab League summit in Cairo on the 4th of March. That summit is going to address the alternative plan to what's happened in Gaza. In other words, President Trump's plan is out. It's an impossibility. So they're going to look at something else. What that will be, I don't know. That's being decided, I think, in advance this Friday in Riyadh by a smaller group of Arab states. But the point is that all of the Arab states are now together on this, and all fear the same thing that I'm concerned about, which is that regardless of what President Trump wants, when President Netanyahu decides it's time to do so, he will resume the bombing campaign in Gaza. All of his key figures are saying it's time to complete the job, finish the job. Everybody knows what that means. President Trump has previously expressed his support for annexation of the West Bank. That means the West Bank could be turned into the imitation Gaza. And then there's Iran. And one wonders what the Iranians will do now that it becomes increasingly clear they're going to be pulverized by sanctions and tried to be driven into another agreement they don't really want. It's a bad situation. We don't know what could trigger it, but all of this could blow up on our faces.
If Donald Trump is a man of peace, and he certainly is manifesting that with respect to Russia and Ukraine, and even in an ancillary way, Europe, why is he supplying Israel with more weapons than it could possibly use? And why did he tell Netanyahu he'll back him up if he goes back into Gaza and starts committing genocide again?
Well, that's a question that only President Trump can answer. And we know that President Trump is surrounded by people that are very much acolytes of Mr. Netanyahu and the Likud party. And it's not surprising that he takes that position. But as this begins to worsen, and I think it will, I really think the region is going to blow up. I've said March. It could be earlier, but I think March. If that happens, Iran will come into it. And inevitably, the Turks, who have been sitting on the sidelines, happy to cooperate with us and the Israelis in order to regain control of Syria. Note that all of the principal members of the government in Syria now, we're talking about this Jolani-led organization, they are Turkish citizens. That's no secret. So
the former terrorists or the present terrorists, the HTS people, are Turkish citizens?
Yes, that's being reported widely in the Arab press. And again, now, if you're a Saudi, if you're an Emirati, you have mixed feelings about this. Remember, the Turks ruled the whole region for many, many hundreds of years. And the experience the Arabs had with the Turks is quite mixed. I'm simply pointing out the realities. And at some point, the Turks will not be able to stay out of this regional fight. So, President Trump has got a very difficult path ahead. And that's why it's very important for us, to the extent that we can, and I think he understands that, to regain a better relationship and put us on a better track with Russia. The problem is that Russia will not abandon Iran if Iran comes under attack from Israel. And you're right, the bombs that you mentioned are very heavy. And normally we've delivered those with heavy bombers. In fact, the original Moabs were literally rolled out of the back of a C-130 off the ramp and dropped on Saddam Hussein's fortifications on the Saudi border.
Wow.
So this is not something that you can deliver easily. Now, what does that mean? How did they do it? I don't know, but it's frightening. And I wouldn't underestimate the Israelis, their ingenuity or ability to deliver those weapons in some fashion that we haven't even thought of.
Colonel, last subject matter, is something going on with respect to the Koreas, North and South, that we should know about?
Yeah, you realize that the coup has passed. The previous president is going to be impeached and imprisoned. He was a sellout to us. He was seen as an imperial proxy or a puppet of the United States. What happens next? The Koreans now realize more than ever that we are leaving Korea. Now, why do I say that? Because President Trump spoke publicly and he said he would be open to South Korea having its own nuclear arsenal. Now, setting aside whether South Korea even wants that and whether or not that's necessary, that's another discussion. The important point here is that President Trump, when I last spoke to him and he asked me, how long have we been in Korea? I said, sir, almost 80 years, almost 70 years. And he said, my God, that's ridiculous. He strongly feels that these overseas garrisons that are attached to this thing that we call informally the empire should be dismantled.
How many American troops are there? I bet he was startled at that number too.
Well, there are 23,000 troops and there are another 3,000, I think, Air Force. But that's not the only picture here. The larger picture is that if you remove us from the peninsula, I don't think there will be a war, and I don't think the South Koreans need a nuclear weapon. If you're going to do that, you need to do a couple of things. First of all, you have to talk to President Xi. Now, why do I say that? It's not because he loves North Korea. President Xi would like nothing better than to get rid of North Korea. Why? He's in the same position that the Russians were in or the Soviets were in back in the early 90s. I've got East Germany and West Germany. Which Germany do I really want? And the Soviets said, well, obviously, we really want West Germany. It's productive. We want to trade with it. We want to do business with it. This East Germany is a problem. And so East Germany was dropped. It literally went out of existence overnight. I think you're going to see something similar eventually happen on the peninsula with North Korea because it's a burden, not an asset. The only way North Korea has survived is because of Russia. And that's because both the Soviets and their successors saw that North Korea was a useful strategic hedge against us and Japan. Now, if you pull the forces out of South Korea, There is no requirement for U.S. forces in Japan because the U.S. forces there, primarily the Marines in Okinawa, not only, but primarily, are really there to reinforce the army on the peninsula. And the reason they're there is because Colin Powell couldn't find anything for the Marine Corps to do. And he finally said, well, look, let's give them the mission of reinforcing the army on the peninsula. And like many, many others, I don't think, Colin Powell ever thought there would be a war again on the peninsula. So we put the Marines there. We gave them literally the mission of reinforcing that. There's no requirement for them. And I would say not much requirement in Japan for us at all once we pull out of that Korean peninsula. And then the whole regional dynamic changes and it goes back to where it was in the past, with Japan once again as a major power who is the normal counterbalance, if you will, to Chinese power and influence. The Chinese never controlled anything beyond the limits of their coast. Everything else at sea was controlled by the Japanese.
But North Korea is run by a madman who does have access to a nuclear power. Am I right?
Well, I don't think he's as mad as people think. Remember that before he went to Hanoi to meet with President Trump to sign this document that would have denuclearized the Korean Peninsula, it would be denuclearized by now, I suspect, if President Trump had signed that. But unfortunately, he had breathing into his ears, the voices from hell. On one side was John Bolton. On the other side was this man, Mike Pompeo.
My God, it's a wonder he can still hear.
Yeah, and they poisoned any possibility for this agreement to succeed after both Putin and Xi said they'll support it. And it's very important. You can't do anything there without their support. So what I'm trying to say is that North Korea is not going to last very long once we leave South Korea. And we don't need to worry about a war because President Xi was the one that Kim went to see before he went to Hanoi. Why? Remember, there was this huge train, armored train that he took from North Korea to Beijing.
Yes.
All this attention. Why was he there? He was there to see the emperor, the Chinese emperor, who is effectively Xi. And the Chinese emperor said, go to Hanoi, sign the agreement. And he bowed and said, yes, Your Imperial Majesty, I will do that. And he was prepared to sign. We're not really needed in that part of the world. And again, I think what President Trump wants to do, he wants to demilitarize our relations with Asia. He wants to do business with Asia. He just wants it to be done on a level that makes sense for us. In other words, something that's, equitable and mutually beneficial, not lopsided in any particular direction. And the way to do that is to get out of South Korea and then ultimately get out of Japan. And the Japanese, privately, behind the scenes, are chomping at the bit to regain their sovereignty 100%.
Colonel, this has been one of the more fascinating conversations I've been privileged to participate in, and we're all over the place. Israel, Egypt, Riyadh, Ukraine, Russia, North Korea, South Korea, Beijing. Thank you for your vast
Nothing could more aptly illustrate the Grand Canyon between Europe and the United States than the attack made by the American President Donald Trump and the Vice President J.D. Vance on little Volodymyr Zelensky. According to President Trump, the leader of the NATO military alliance and the leader of the country that has shouldered the vast majority of the financial burden in supporting the Zelensky regime, and the leader of the country that would be expected to shoulder the burden of any NATO all-out war against Russia. He calls Zelensky a dictator, a moderately successful comedian, which admittedly is overstating it a bit. This is a man that can play the piano with his penis, after all. Not Trump, But Zelensky, I've heard that Trump couldn't, but let's not go there. He called Zelensky a thief. He said that he'd robbed hundreds of billions of dollars from the American taxpayer. He's going to be dodged. And I've come up with my own idea for a dodge in the United Kingdom, which we very badly need. Thanks, Mr. Musk, for the model that you have provided, although ours will be called DOSH, Department of State Honesty. But going back to the main subject, a dictator, a thief, a man who apparently tricked the United States into a war which need never have been fought and which Zelensky nor Europe is able to end. Only the man you've been bad-mouthing over the last couple of days, Donald Trump, can end this war. J.D. Vance went further in remarks reported in the British mass-selling Daily Mail. He says that Zelensky will regret bad-mouthing Donald Trump and denounces his atrocious response to the prospect of peace talks. I predicted to you long ago, but let me do so again. I know schadenfreude is something our mothers would have told us to avoid. Taking pleasure in the misfortune of others is never a good look, but let me predict all over again. Zelensky will soon be in that alleyway, filled with used prophylactics and redundant US-backed dictators. It's an ugly alleyway, no matter how much money you have been able to steal. That's if Zelensky manages to get out in time. If I were him, I would read the writing on the wall. Hello, darkness, my old friend, it says. You are doomed, Zelensky. However, that's not how it looks in the European Union. In the British Parliament today, you know, I always describe the two sides of the British Parliament as two cheeks of the same arse, but there's a bit in the middle, if you'll forgive me. And that bit is Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. The two cheeks, Badenoch, Starmer, and the bit in the middle, Ed Davey, are all still gung-ho for Vladimir Zelensky and are still denouncing President Donald Trump. It's going to be an interesting meeting. I'd like to be a fly on the wall when Sir Keir Starmer turns up at the White House, hoping that the security staff will recognize who he is. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting, because Great Britain has turned into the most visceral, snarling, ugly poodle that it is possible to imagine. It has turned against its master. It's seeking to bite the ankles of the man who feeds it. And it is distinctly obvious that the attempt to declare war on Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump at the same time is entirely doomed. Let's take the issue of the British 10,000, the gallant that are going to be asked to ride on and on into the valley of death, just like the Scots Guards at the Battle of Balaclava in the charge of the Light Brigade. They were all doomed. They were all slaughtered. And so will the 10,000 that Keir Starmer intends to send to Ukraine. And if I were not a patriot, I would welcome it. If I did not care about the lives of our soldiers, I would welcome it. But as I am and I do, I cannot welcome it. Therefore, I declare war upon it. I declare war upon the idea that of all the countries in Europe and all the countries in North America, the only patsy that will go on reinforcing the failure of the Zelensky presidency will be my own country. I cannot accept the blood of my own armed forces being shed for that little sniveling, coke sniffing thief that is Volodymyr Zelensky. I will not accept it, and even more because the leading general in the British Army this day said that the only way that we can intervene in the war in Ukraine will be to immediately reintroduce conscription into the British armed forces. That's because 4,700 more people left the British armed forces last year than joined. That's because we have only 87,000 soldiers, and only half of them can possibly be described as frontline combat troops, and of that half, 25% are unavailable for duty for one reason or another at any one time. I will not allow to go unopposed the idea of perhaps a third of Britain's fighting forces being sent to the chiseling crook Zelensky. And I promised Keir Starmer last night, I do so again here tonight. If you try to introduce conscription in Britain, we will lead and organize the biggest mass movement that Britain has seen since the 1980s, the movement that destroyed the poll tax and brought down the premiership of the then apparently unassailable Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. The day that the first flag-draped coffins of British boys coming home from a new Crimea war will be the day that your political career is ended forever, Keir Starmer. Heed me on this. Don't do it. Mind you, after the heavyweight champion of world diplomacy, Sergei Lavrov, said this week that no NATO forces, however badged, however flagged, whether EU flagged or national flagged, no NATO forces will be allowed to enter Ukrainian territory. If they do, they will be immediately attacked with extreme prejudice. You might have thought that that would have stopped Keir Starmer in his tracks. But no, today he said, we're going to fly RAF Typhoon aircraft from Polish bases to patrol Ukraine's airways. Well, if that happens, the Typhoons will be shot from the skies. The Polish bases that they're taking off from will be Oroshenked. They will be struck with devastating force, and there will be no Article 5 protection, no NATO solidarity involved. Just in case any of you out there are misreading Donald Trump's signals and think that Article 5 of the NATO treaty even exists anymore, it will not exist for sure in an unauthorized, unilateral British attempt to join the war on the side of Zelensky. So don't do it. I warn you, Premier Keir Starmer, it will be the death of you before we'll allow the death. Zelensky's Ukraine is not worth the bones of a single British grenadier, and we will oppose you until our last breath. But back to the big picture. The extraordinary meeting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia this week between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio, it is now clear, set a course for the ending of this war. And as Rubio said, the end of sanctions against Russia. Of course, I'm not expecting those sanctions against Russia to end in the United Kingdom. Well, we've been hating on Russia since the middle of the 19th century. We ain't going to stop now. So no British company can dream of doing business in the booming Russian market. Forget it. The French and the Italians are already on their way in. The Americans will be on their way in. You turn if you want to, says Donald Trump. But if you don't, we will take the deals. And that's what's going to happen when the sanctions end, as they must end, according to the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, with the end of the war. So you'll be able to get RT in America but you probably won't be able to get it in the United Kingdom. The truth is that the plan of the Russian and American spokespeople is still some way from a conclusion. But the rough outline of it looks like this. There will have to be presidential elections in Ukraine after a ceasefire, with all forces remaining in place at the point they have reached by the declaration of the ceasefire. The next step will be a presidential election in Ukraine. Russia's position is that it will not negotiate with Zelensky, and Zelensky has already declared he will not negotiate with Russia. In fact, he passed a law to make it illegal for him to negotiate with Russia. In any case, his presidential term has now long elapsed. He is an illegitimate president, or as Donald Trump called him today, he is a dictator who has banned the opposition parties, who has exiled or imprisoned opposition politicians, who has placed his main rival under house arrest in Kiev in preparation for charges against him of corruption. And the idea that Zelensky, as a dictator, unelected, with 4% approval rating in the country, according to Donald Trump, can win a presidential election is, of course, entirely fanciful. So Russia will sit down under the shadow of the demise, political demise, one hopes, of Zelensky, and will seek to find light in negotiations with a new president of Ukraine. All territories liberated by the Russian army will remain Russian. All territories which are Russian-speaking territories, which are ethnically Russian territories, will be a part of Novorussia. And I do hope and I do believe that that will include the Russian jewel in the crown, the great city of Odessa, of which I have such fond memories from my personal experience in former times. And then government will emerge in Kiev, which is demilitarized, which is declared officially neutral, which can join no alliances or pacts, and which will establish effective neutrality, hopefully friendship with all of its neighbors. Could be a profitable little number, that, you know, to be the bridge between the East and the West, to be the bridge in trade and commercial terms between Russia and the others. If a wise government comes to power in Ukraine, I hope that it will recognize that. But that will be the end of the war, and it will be the end of the sanctions, whatever Keir Starmer and the civil servants in Whitehall pretend to believe at this moment. Only time for me to turn to the area where Trump ain't doing anything like as good. We have a situation now where an American brokered ceasefire in the Lebanon has been broken more than 1,500 times by Israel, with the wholesale slaughter of hundreds of civilians, most of them women and children, as usual, and where the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon is declared in the Western media to have been completed, but in fact, the Israelis have left 5 armed fortresses inside Lebanon, posing a major dilemma to the pro-American, indeed American hand-picked president of Lebanon. Is he really going to allow Israel to occupy 5 fortresses inside Lebanon? Well, if he does, the Lebanese resistance will have to remove them themselves, and on past form, they'll probably do that in pretty short order. But what will the result of that be? Will it be a resumption of Israel's war against Lebanon And if so, what will Donald Trump do about that? What will Donald Trump do about the decision by the Israeli government to seize the churches and property of the Armenian Christian community in Holy Jerusalem, in the very place where Jesus was crucified? What will Donald Trump's evangelical base say about this seizure by something calling itself the Jewish state, seizing ancient Christian property in the Armenian Quarter, known throughout the whole world and for millennia as the Christian Quarter of Jerusalem? It's about to be seized by Netanyahu's gang and settled with Israeli Jewish settlers. What will Donald Trump do about the fact that the occupied West Bank of the River Jordan is currently the state of widespread carnage, huge numbers of casualties, again, mainly women and even babies, murdered in the West Bank by settlers and by Netanyahu's murder gang in the Israel occupation force? What is Donald Trump going to do about any attempt by Netanyahu to drive millions of Palestinian cities over the River Jordan into the Hashemite kingdom? Is he going to allow that to happen using American weapons and American money? And how is he going to explain that to the blinking, plainly terrified Hashemite king who sat with him in the Oval Office just the other day? And finally, what is Donald Trump going to do about Gaza? He has not actually repeated, at least in the last 72 hours, the cockamamie idea that he is now the owner of Gaza. You'll recall he said he was going to buy it. Buy it from whom, I asked. The people who own Gaza are not sellers. They won't sell, whatever the price. Even if it's their own deaths, they will not sell it. So he dropped the idea of buying Gaza and merely declared that he now owned it, presumably to build a Trump Tower, presumably to build some casinos and condominiums in the Donald Trump fashion and style. But him and whose army? Are the American army going to invade and occupy Gaza? How do you think that will work out, Donald? And when the first American casualties are arriving back with all state honors, having died in the building of a new Trump Tower hotel, how do you think that's going to look to your electoral base? All of this coming up in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes, because this is the mother of all talk.
Hello, Garland Nixon here. And, I wasn't necessarily planning on doing a video anytime soon. I've been kind of busy today, but some new information has come out that I think we better discuss. Old Zelenskyy better start looking over his shoulder and start considering what he's saying. So, well, and I hope the video's there. So, the audio and all, do me a favor, everybody, let me know in the chat if the audio sounds good. So this is going to be an interesting video. As you know, the Trump administration has taken a position. Oh, everybody sound okay? Great. Has taken a position that, Vladimir Zelenskyy has been unhappy with. The position that we want this thing over, we want peace, we're going to make it happen. Okay, And old Zelensky's been running around yapping, the Brits. So we're going to send 1 million troops and just overwhelm Russia. Why didn't they just do that in the first place, right? 1 million troops, and by that they mean 12.5 guys who they're going to send some soccer hooligans to overturn a dustbin in St. Petersburg, I guess. Boy, that'll really, that's about all they got. They got some soccer hooligans that ain't going to work, but they've talked a lot of trash. Zelensky has been talking lots of trash. And I'll say this. Let me say this. As a guy who, I was in law enforcement, a guy who I taught organized crime for years, a guy who, believe it or not, when I was involved in law enforcement, I literally knew a lot of organized crime figures. When I worked with the Attorney General's office as an investigator, I dealt with some organized crime figures with businesses they dealt with. I understand the game, right? I understand the game. And I understand, let's be honest about it. Donald Trump worked in New York City doing real estate. New York City is divided into 5 families. What is it? Lucchese, Bonanno, and on, right? Okay. The 5 crime families that run New York. You ain't going to do real estate in New York unless you work with the mafia. You want to build. Whichever mafia family has that area, right? You got to use the right unions. You got to have clearance. You got to, the right palms have to be greased. The right things have to be done to make sure that you're working with the people in the area. And there's no way in the world that Trump was involved in real estate in New York City and he don't understand the whole organized crime thing. Let's be honest. You got to know that. That's reality, right? Okay. So, old Zelensky's been yappy. He's been disrespectful. See, in organized crime and in that genre of activity, the one thing you can't do is be respectful. Let me give you an example. His boy Witkoff, that's one of Trump's boy, New York real estate guy, also big New York real estate guy. Again, he understands organized crime. When he went to Netanyahu, I don't know if you know the story, but Trump sends his boy to Netanyahu, and Witkoff says, Netanyahu, I want to talk with you. And Netanyahu apparently said, well, we've got a Jewish holiday. I can't talk with you till Saturday. It was a Tuesday. And apparently Witkoff said, I don't give a blank about your Jewish holiday. We're meeting today. Come to my office in Tel Aviv. Apparently, at that point, Netanyahu came to his office and Witkoff said, you're going to stop. Trump's going to be president in 3 days. Stop the bombing today. Now, other things are going on, but I think Netanyahu understood what that meant. That's the way they do things in New York. That's the way it runs. When a decision is made, and you don't disrespect the boss. So I'm going to start by reading a post to you from Donald Trump about old Zelensky, and then I'm going to get to that's him stating his position, and then I'm going to get to the part that his boy said that Zelensky better listen very closely to. Okay, Truth Social, Donald Trump posts the following. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle, right? So he's saying, hey, man, you're a con man. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't Sleepy Joe demand equalization? In that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace. and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. That's Donald Trump. Now, we can go into the past, who's to blame, who should have done what, etc. Fair enough. I'm just saying, Donald Trump has put that out. Apparently, 11 o'clock this morning. Donald Trump wasn't happy, was he? He was very angry. He called him a modest, at best comedian. He says, you're a con artist. You conned us out of money. You played Sleepy Joe like a fiddle. We were disrespected by you listen to this. Zelensky has done a terrible job. He called him a dictator without elections. So what that says is Trump is very, very angry at Zelensky. Zelensky's going around running his mouth, isn't he? That ain't the bad part. That ain't the part that Zelensky has to worry about, because what Trump is doing is he's venting a little bit. I'm pissed at this guy. How dare he? Okay. Now, you know how much you know about the mafia. The boss ain't going to come talk to you. His boy is going to come talk to you, right? His boy's going to come talk to you. One of his made men are going to knock on your door. I'm here to deliver a message from the boss. Now, let's just say this. Sometimes that message comes in the way of a piano wire around your spindly little neck. And other times, the boss goes back. He knows the wife and kids. He doesn't want to make your kids an orphan. He's trying to avoid doing something that he really don't want to do. So he sends his boy to, hey, just want to deliver a message from the boss. And your eyes get big because, sometimes when somebody says, I'm here to deliver a message from the boss, it's a message you'll never recover from. That guy's got a plastic liner in his trunk and some duct tape and a shovel. And the message is going to be a message that you'll never be able to answer. Well, let's just say this. I'm going to read the message. Exclusive. Vice President J.D. Vance warns Zelensky over disgraceful public attacks on Trump. Confirms Ukrainian elections are now U.S. policy. So Trump felt disrespected. He made it clear on Truth Social. And now he sends a made man out to talk. Let me read this to you. Washington, D.C. In an exclusive interview with the National Pulse on Wednesday morning, Vice President J.D. Vance issued a stern warning to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky regarding his public criticism of President Donald Trump and the administration's peace initiative. Vance describes Zelensky's approach as disgraceful and counterproductive, emphasizing that such tactics could jeopardize Ukraine's relationship with its most crucial ally. Let me tell you something. I think you get the picture. Trump said, look, Zelensky, you jerk, you're getting on my nerves. And J.D. Vance, Zelensky, this is your last warning. Let me continue reading Zelensky's last warning. I'm quoting. Zelensky is getting really bad advice, and I don't know from whom, Vance said. He's not dealing with Joe Biden and the Biden administration anymore. He's dealing with Donald Trump and the Trump administration. Vance warned against Zelensky's public protestations in recent days, stating the idea that he's going to litigate his disagreements with the president in the public square. I mean, you know the president very well. Obviously, I know the president very well. This is not a good way to deal with President Trump, Vance said. I think we can all read between the lines. You disrespected the boss. You disrespected the man in charge. What would happen in New York City? What would happen with the mafia in New York, the mafia in Russia, the mafia in Shanghai? What happens? You disrespected the boss. First of all, you ain't getting a chance, second chance. But let's just say, for the sake of purposes, the boss just right now, he ain't ready to make a move on you. And the boss says, doggone it, he shakes his fist. That's what Trump did. He shaked his fist. This guy's a jerk. He's an idiot. He's getting on my nerves. What's he talking about? He screwed everything up. I got to clean up his mess. And then he sends out Vance. And tell me this doesn't sound like a made man giving the last warning. Zelensky is getting really bad advice, and I don't know from whom. Vance said he's not dealing with Joe Biden and the Biden administration. He's dealing with Donald Trump and the Trump administration. The idea that he's going to litigate his disagreements with the president in the public square. I mean, you know the president very well, obviously. I know the president very well. This is not a good way to deal with President Trump. Let me just say this. I don't know Vladimir Zelensky. Don't know him. Never met the guy. Don't think much of him. But I can tell you this. If Vladimir Zelensky is smart, he's wise, if he's prudent, dare I use the term prudent, he'll pick up the phone and he will make a phone call and he'll say, hey guys, I was probably a little bit out of line. And, you know, I've said some things that probably I can't bring them back, but I'm sorry for them. And in hindsight, you know, maybe I went a little too far.
It's too late now.
What can I do? What do I need to do to iron this thing out? Look, I think you're right. You know what? I don't think an election, maybe we even need an election. Maybe it's time for me to step down. You know, I've been doing this thing a long time. We got, you know, bombs dropping over here, people goose stepping around Kiev. Perhaps my work here is done. So in light of some recent things that have been brought to my attention, I'd just like to ask you, would you prefer that I stick around to the elections if that stability is something that you need? Or if you need to, I'd be happy to head off to the UAE or Dubai, south of France, Miami, whatever the case may be, you know? Sure, we can work something out. I'll go on about my business and we can work together to achieve your goals. I support your goals, in fact. You know, I've been thinking about this thing. This war's been going on far too long. Why do we have wars anyway? Oh, who needs war? Who needs war? I don't need war. People get killed in war. So I just wanted to reiterate my support for the president and his goals, and volunteer my services to do anything that I can to achieve his worthy goals. And certainly apologize for any disrespectful things that I might have said. I'm just saying, from my perspective, Zelensky, if he doesn't watch and shut his stinking yap very, very soon, I have a bad feeling about how this thing could end up. Let's go on. Of course, the Ukrainians are going to have their perspective. The way to surface that is in a private discussion with American diplomats. He is attacking the only reason this country exists publicly right now, and it's disgraceful. And it's not something that's going to move the president of the United States. In fact, it's going to have the opposite effect. He's telling you, you better shut your mouth, or things will get ready to go bad. The vice president reaffirmed Trump's policy on Ukraine. The war must end. He further asserted the U.S. policy now requires that Ukraine have elections. The president won the election. He won it convincingly, and he's made clear that American policy is to stop the killing and bring the war to a close, Vance said. Now, I talked to the president this morning. What is that telling you? I talked to the president this morning. That's saying he brought a message. Yes, Yeah, Garland, Luigi. Oh, yes, Luigi. Got a message. I just talked to the boss this morning. Yes, Luigi. You know what that means? That means he's bringing you a message from the boss. And you better listen. Vance says, now I talked to the president this morning, actually, and he has an incredible amount of sympathy and admiration for the people of Ukraine. He wants the killing to stop because he doesn't want innocent Ukrainians to keep losing their lives. So I think he very much thinks about this from the perspective, not just, of course, of his obligation to the United States, but also he wants the brutality and the killing to stop. Vance went on stressing the point. He has said the goal of administration policy is to end the conflict. So now you know that has to happen, right? Zelensky has to take that seriously. Our European allies have to take that seriously. That is the goal of administration policy. You're not going to move the president away from that goal. You're not going to change his mind. Certainly not by attacking him publicly in the media. Okay? So he finishes. He has said the goal of the policy is to end this conflict. And here, this sounds mafia, doesn't it? So now you know that has to happen, right? Zelensky has to take that seriously. In other words, either it's going to happen with you, Zelensky, or it's going to happen without you. Now with your decision. Very shortly, it ain't going to be your decision anymore. He says, so you know that has to happen, right? This is, come on. Let's not be stupid here and pretend that we don't understand how power dynamics work. International politics is like the mafia. Let me give you an example. I'm just throwing this out there. I don't know anything. Plane accidents happen. But Prigozhin got jumpy. And then he was told, go to Belarus. Stay in Belarus. Nobody's going to bother you in Belarus. Prigozhin couldn't stay in Belarus, could he? No. He had to come back across the border. He's flying to St. Petersburg. He's got to fly all around. At the time, I thought to myself, the boss told me to stay in Belarus. I'd probably stay in Belarus. I don't know. Maybe Prigozhin knows something I don't know. Prigozhin didn't stay in Belarus, did he? So now you know that has to happen, right? Zelensky has to take that seriously. But there's a second part. Our European allies have to take that seriously. It's like in the old days, when the parent would say, I've talked to you and talked to you and talked to you until I was blue in the face and I'm done talking to you. Means I'm done talking. I don't want to hear this crap anymore. I don't want to hear, how come I'm not involved in the talks? If we're not involved in the talks, then there will be no deal. You keep running your mouth, you ain't going to be involved in no talks. Okay? I'm just saying, from the looks of things to me, the message is getting clear. The boss has had enough. And he is showing you his grace by sending me to tell you, you better shut your stinking pie hole. That's what the boss says. The next message is going to be a different kind of message. It's going to be a message that will be delivered, and you'll be the only one that never has to worry about getting a message again. I mean, I don't know. There are people that may disagree with me. Okay? There's people that may disagree with me. But when the boss sends his boy and says, right, you understand that. Right? Zelensky has to take that seriously. Our European allies have to take that seriously. You're not going to move the president away from that goal. You're not going to change his mind. Man, when old Luigi knocks on my door, you know the president very well. Obviously, I know the president very well. It's not a good way to deal with the president. I wasn't planning on doing a video today. But when I read what President Trump put on Truth Social, I knew he was pissed. And I'm not surprised that he called his consigliere into the room. Jay, Marco, my little talk with you guys. This Mook here, this Zelensky guy, he's getting on the nerves. Need you to go out and have a talk with him. He takes a shot. Think you understand what to say? Read my Truth Social post today. JD Vance looked at Rubio. Rubio looked at JD Vance. Called in Tulsi. He called in the CIA guy. Hey, the boss has spoken. If they looked at Tulsi, they looked at the CIA. They said, in the event that he doesn't have the wherewithal to accept this message, looked at the CIA guy. It's what it is. If you saw the movie with the one where they took out Jimmy Hoffa, right? And was it Joe Pesci or whoever it was that was the mob guy? And he asked about this, the victim. He looks at it and he says, "It's what it is." He looked at the mob boss. It's what it is. It's what it is. So I suspect that Trump, he just talked to JD Vance. And I think JD Vance at that time called in his Tulsi, called in his CIA leaders, took a picture of Zelensky. He put one of those little circles with the lines through it. He hands it to Tulsi. He hands it to the CIA boss. What about Zelensky? Well, I'm going to deliver him a message. Let's hope he gets it. And of course, I'm sure they said, well, what if he doesn't get the message? He just looked at him. It's what it is. And they were like, it's what it is. What it is. It's what it is. That's all I got to say. If that boy don't listen this time, he thinks he's got problems with the Banderites. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm a man of peace, and I hope peace for the joy to the world and peace to all. I was a police officer. I picked up a body in my day. I picked up bodies in the Chesapeake Bay that had bricks, cinder blocks tied to them. Yes, I picked up bodies that had cinder blocks to them. And I suspect some of those bodies that had cinder blocks to them at one point or another, they got a call. Zelensky's a lucky man. That's all I can say. He's a lucky man. He heard from JD Vance. He's a very, very lucky man. But I think his luck just ran out. I'm telling you, if you're watching this, Zelensky, you better take heed when someone says to you, so you know that has to happen, right? That's the last end of it. That's it. All right, let me look through. Anybody? I think that's it. All right, everybody.
Kofi, follow me.